how we should be praying that the Lord would give us vision. Vision to see Him, vision in our challenges. You know, really quickly, if you haven't turned in your Bibles, you should turn to Romans 8. We'll be there this morning. You also want to pull out your notes that you have in your worship pack there. But one of the things that I think that has been the lesson that every parent throughout every generation and every culture of every time period from the beginning of time has had to teach their kids, no matter how big the society was or how small, whether they lived in the jungles or in the cities or in their rural areas, or whether they lived on an island of paradise like Hawaii. Every parent has had to teach their kids about life. I've wrestled with the lessons I got to teach my kid, and I got a long list of them by now. Teach him how to mow the lawn. That's up there. Now, he's already doing some sort of mowing. He just doesn't cut anything. I want to teach him how to wash the dishes. That'd be really helpful for us and clean his room, though he's getting that one down with a little bit of complaining, but he's working on it, right? I want to teach him, though, here's the one that is universal no matter where you lie. I need to teach him that life is hard. I have to teach him that life is hard. And that's a lesson, though, that doesn't come very simply. You'll say it, but you don't believe it until you experience it. Then you're shocked by it, then you remember it, and then you get it, right? But as a parent, I want my child to realize that this world is a hard place because it is, because that's an important lesson for him to learn. And I need to work hard to teach him that. And it's something that he's not going to totally get, even though I'm going to tell him that he's going to be reinforced, hopefully, in my actions by providing him with hard circumstances to realize it's not fair, it's not easy, it doesn't always go one for one. You put in the quarter, you get out the candy bar. No, sometimes you put the quarter and you don't get anything out. Sometimes life is just like that, and I need my son to get that. And I need to go to great lengths to help him understand that, not simply to make his life easy, but so he can operate with wisdom and tact in the world that is. See, I think the same perspective God has in His mind as our Father to His children. He has got to help us understand that this life that we're in is going to be hard, that it won't always make sense. In fact, the Psalms are littered with people who are wrestling with the fact that life seems not to make sense. I mean, one of my favorite Psalms in the whole world, I won't tell you the number of it, but is this guy who is literally complaining that all those who seem to be doing the wrong thing seem to get the right results. And he who is trying to do the right thing gets the wrong results. And he's just confused and bewildered, sort of like that picture of up the down staircase that guy painted. You're trying to go up the stairs, you're really going down the stairs, and what's really going on? It sort of leaves you a bit bewildered, a bit befuddled, but God is very strategic and very clear that He has to make sure His children understand that life is hard. And that's why I believe throughout the scriptures that He left for us, He speaks commonly and often and without any kind of red face or bashing, saying, guys, suffering exists and it's going to be really hard for you. Romans chapter 8, we started last week, right? And this section we're calling it deep hope. But hope predicates the reality of suffering, the reality of pain. You don't hope for what you do not, if you already have something. And you rarely hope for suffering. You hope for the joy. And if you have it, you have full joy. You don't have hope anymore. You have reality that you're experiencing. Romans 8:24 is going to tell us that. But in chapter 8, verse 17 actually, moving forward, he's going to introduce in the middle of this conversation about hope, the reality of suffering, because again, without suffering, there is no hope. And so if we have deep hope, God needs to help, not there yet, help us understand that we have suffering to wrestle with. So I want you to look to verse 17 here. Romans 17, just read through this, because as His children, He's got to teach us this lesson. Chapter 8, verse 17. We hit last week, how do you know that you're a child of God? I won't rehash all that for you. You can listen to the podcast. But he says, and if, verse 17, if children, and hopefully you know if you are, use those tests from last week, then you're heirs. That's the glory, that's the hope. Heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ. Now, if you're an heir, it means you don't yet have it. It means you're anticipating. If I'm an heir of my parents' inheritance, they're still alive. Once I have it, I'm not an heir anymore. I'm a receiver. I'm the owner of it. Heirship implies non-possession. So I'm an heir of God and fellow heirs with Christ. Here's the statement, though, provided that we suffer with him, in order that we may be glorified with him. For I consider, Paul says, the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. Period. We'll stop right there. Now, this is one of those most amazing sections that Christians can just get so much from, and so encouraging for us. But we have to start by realizing that there's two topics that are being introduced here. And this is now where the slide comes in. It's glory and it's suffering, right? Glory and suffering. And he seems to be saying that glory is conditioned upon suffering. That your glory, your inheritance, your heirship is conditioned that you suffer. That you suffer. That I suffer. Not simply Christ suffered so life will be easy, but that you and I suffer. This seems to be written in a way that says, unless you actually suffer with him, then you don't receive glory. Now that should make us think for a little bit, but before we get into thinking about that, let's just throw out this blanket statement and really wrestle with this one, because I think a lot of Christians don't wrestle with this statement enough, and we need to. First off, write this down. We need to expect suffering in this life. When it comes to life being hard, we have to expect it to be hard. That's the challenge of a parent to teach their child. You've got to expect life to be hard. You need to understand this is across the board. This is people who are following Christ, people who aren't following Christ, that life is going to be hard. And my fear of me saying that is that some of you in here who tend to worry might get paranoid. You know, you're going to look around every seashell and look for pain. You're going to look behind every corner and look for pain. And you're going to look at everything and go, when is it going to happen? Because it's going to happen. I'm just afraid of it happening. And my goal here is not to make you paranoid, but it is to give you some anchoring for your feet. Some anticipation so you're ready when it arrives. Because I don't want you to think wrongly about what this life is to be, because a lot of Christians and a lot of preachers actually preach that way at times, in which God, because you're his child, would never let you suffer. That God, because you're his child, is all about making your life happy and healthy and wealthy. And so anything that has to do with pain and suffering is outside of his plan. In fact, that's why I think Paul wrote this in here, provided that we suffer, because it's a condition. It's required of all Christians that you and I suffer. We'll get to that in a second, but it's a condition of it. We need to expect suffering. I'm afraid that for many Christians and for many people who are exploring the faith of Christ, there's this topic of suffering that is the most difficult to really wrestle with. And that's why Paul puts it in here and why we got to address it severely. I think of Barbara Bush, our former First Lady. She wrote a book called Spoken from the Heart. It came out a few years ago. And in that, she tells about her life. But when she was 17 years old, I did not know this, obviously, until the book. But when she was 17 years old, she was involved in a fatal car accident. And so she was driving, she was at fault, and she was talking to a friend, and she ran through a stop sign and careened into another car, and actually the car driver was a classmate of hers at her school. And this is what she writes about that incident. Next, let's catch up. There we go. In those awful seconds, the car door must have flung open, because apparently she was thrown out of the car by the impact, and my body rose in the air until gravity took over, and I was pulled hard and fast back to earth. The whole time, she adds later, I was praying that the person in the other car was alive. In my mind, I was calling, please God, please God, please God, over and over and over again. But the person in the other car didn't survive. And she says, I lost my faith that November. Lost it for many, many years. See, the hardship and the hard part about suffering is usually there's lots of pleading attached to it. Lord, help my family. Lord, heal me. Lord, heal my child. Don't let this happen. There's petitions and requests attached to it. But God doesn't always promise to necessarily answer every one of those. And in this one, clearly, he didn't. And she said that the spiritual stool was literally knocked out from under her. She lost her faith. And I don't want that to happen with you. I don't want that to happen with you when, not if, but when suffering and hardship of any level comes into your world. And it will, likely for some of you, it's going to happen this week. For some, it's already happened. It's been the story of your life. You have just been sitting in suffering. Your body has not cooperated from day one. Your body has maybe taken on something that you can't have any answers for by the doctors. And you're just sitting in that, and you don't know when it's going to get better, and you're wondering why it has to be like this. And let me tell you why. Let me tell you the why. Because God promised it. God promised that you would suffer in this world. Genesis 2:27. The day you eat of this fruit, you will die. Now, you unpack what that death was, right? It's spiritual death, physical death, but when it gets to the physical, the world side, chapter 3 lays out, there's a cursed ground attached to that. There's pain in childbirth. There's turmoil in relationships, and that's just a small little section describing it. It was much more than that went on, and we see the effects of that throughout Genesis with Cain and Abel, where jealousy and bitterness set in, and he kills his brother. No doubt that caused Adam and Eve to weep bitterly and deeply over what they saw. You as parents should know this. Understand how much you would weep if one child killed the other child. That was no just black and white situation. Think of the immense pain that was caused there. We have to expect it because God promised it would happen. In fact, he reinforces this in the scriptures that hardship and pain and suffering will come your way. Here's just a few from the Gospels. Next slide. Jesus says, in this world you will have trouble. Promise, right? Hey, but here's a little hope. Take heart, though, okay? I've overcome it. But you're still going to have it. You're still going to experience it. Here's another one he said. The poor you will always have with you. You're always going to have the poor. And some of you might be some of them. There will always be poor. There will always be poverty. There's always going to be lack of food in some areas. There's always going to be overabundance and greed in others. The means of poverty is going to come in all different kinds of forms, partly because there's no rain, partly because there's greed, partly because, you name it, there's war, and there's always going to be the poor, guaranteed, until Christ returns. That's going to be the state of the world. And you can help them. And anyways, we'll go to the next one. You can help them at any time, right? You can help them whenever you want, but you're always going to have them no matter how much you help them. It's always going to be there. Last one. Jesus talks about more of this, the bigger scale the concerns. You'll hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see that you're not alarmed. See, most of us are. That's kind of our natural, oh my goodness, what's really going on here? Just don't panic, don't freak out. For these must take place. These must take place. I'm promising you they're going to happen, and you're going to be caught in the middle of them. You're going to be in that war. You're going to be in that country when that war happens. You're going to be where the famine is at. You're going to be experiencing that. You're going to be where the plague breaks out, and you're going to get that disease on your body. You're going to be there. When the economy crashes, you're going to be there and experience that. Do not be alarmed. These things must take place, but the end is not yet. I'm promising you it's going to happen. Yeah, but Tim, I'm a child of God. I'm to be shielded from, as a parent, I would never want to give my kids or let them intentionally have things. I would protect them from the problems of the world as much as I can. That's what parents do. Jot this down in your notes. Here's a helpful reminder for you. Next slide. The Father leads his sons because he led his Son through suffering, not from it. The Father always leads his sons. This is our Heavenly Father. Through suffering. Not to stop in there, not to camp out and just leave you there forever, right? Because we know that glory's coming. He leads you through it, but not from it. The best example of this is his only begotten Son, Christ. He took on flesh. He was in the desert for 40 days. That had to have been pretty tough, right? And God didn't provide for him during that time, and then he fed him after that. But that was a hard valley of the shadow of death, we might say. And then he was ridiculed by the populace. Toward the end of his life, when we get to the slowdown, he was betrayed by his friends. He was experienced great injustice, which resulted in him being beaten severely to the point of death, and then crucified on a cross, the Father, though before all that happened, listened to the cries of his Son in the garden. Father, it's possible, take this cup from me. But not my will, your will be done. And the Father said, my plan here is not to take you from it, but take you through it. The Father leads his sons, and we learned last week that you and I are his sons. He leads them through it, not from it. That is hugely important for us to keep in mind. So we have to expect pain in this life because we are his sons, especially even as disciples of Jesus. I mean, Jesus says this, if you're my disciple, you will deny yourself, pick up your cross. We think that has to do with persecution, but I think it just has to do with suffering in general, being willing to suffer wherever his path leads. It might be in a high mountain or a low valley. It might be across raging rivers or in the grassy plains. Wherever he leads, I'm following him there. I'm going to carry that cross through it all, and that's an extra heavy burden to carry. I mean, he wasn't going to make your load lighter necessarily. He was going to add to it. I want you to follow me no matter what comes your way. I promise you it'll be hard. I promise you suffering will be there. That's my promise to you in this life. Expect it. Let's not get all this rose-colored glasses for this world. Let's be realistic, and God is very realistic about this world we live in. But he's not a God without hope. Now, expecting pain, I know, is something that even the pagans, the world can preach. They all say that, right? Just got to expect pain. But here's what they can't preach. Glory comes not because of suffering, but because of the way you suffer. The glory that we're anticipating in the suffering isn't just coming because you suffer. It's coming because of the way that you suffer. And that's the important point that we're going to get at here. So I want you to go back to Romans. Are you still there? You are still there. I know you are. Chapter 8. Verse 17, here's where we get this from. And if children, then heirs. That's the good part. Let me clarify that. Heirs of God and fellow heirs of Christ. Provided that we suffer. You don't get the glory because you suffer. You get the glory because you suffer what? Preposition? With him. Everyone's going to suffer, but you decide if you suffer with him or not. Provided we suffer with him. Now, what does that mean, really, right? What kind of suffering are you talking about there? What does it mean to suffer with him? Some will kind of pigeonhole this into saying this is only about persecution. It only deals with persecution. I got to go off and I got to preach hellfire and brimstone so people will persecute me, and then I'll be suffering with Christ. If I preach love of Christ, people will like me, and there's no suffering, and so then there's no suffering and no glory. Or I've got to sell all that I have in the whole world and live under a bridge and suffer greatly and take on boils and whip myself and inflict pain on myself because suffering brings glory. But no, it's suffering with him brings the glory, not just suffering in general. And the suffering here, I think, is more general than just the persecution. It's all the sufferings that we experience in this fallen world. In fact, the context from chapter 8, verse 18, going down to verse 25, points to that because we talk about the world groaning, pointing back to the curse that God placed on the world and the effects it has, and we as children of God groan. What makes you groan in this world? Obviously, if you're being persecuted, yeah, you kind of groan, waiting for that to end, right? But do you not groan when you have cancer? Lord, I cannot wait until my body is restored. This is not what I want. How about when your relationships are totally at odds with each other? Is there not a groaning going on? What causes you to groan? See, I think that's the category that this is. It's all the various kinds of trials and sufferings that you and I experience. It's that cancer, it's that relationship, it's that loss of job. It is persecution. It's the economy crashing. It's the wars and the rumors of wars in the world. It's the famines. It's all that happens on this world that we experience. Now, here's the thing, right? Suffer, but with him. What does it look like to suffer with Christ? Here's what I think it means. You go to the doctors, and you learn that you have been diagnosed with cancer. And it's not a good cancer. It's a bad one. And it's going to require lots of chemo, and we have all had enough testimonies of people in this room who've had chemo, and so you get it firsthand. You've seen the consequences of that, and it's not a pretty road ahead. Suffering with Christ is you not saying, Lord, why in the world would you do this? I cannot have any more confidence in your trustworthiness. This is so beyond what I think God would actually do for me. No, it's you saying, I count my body and my hair and my health and my physique and even my future, because there's a potential loss of a future there. The memories of my kids down the road, I count all of that a loss when I think about you. You are more prized treasure than all those things. I think that's what it means to suffer with him. That you go into it and you say, Christ, you are worthy and worth all of this. You are more desirable than even a healthy body, more desirable than that future that I anticipated. You are more desirable than all of that. Or maybe somebody causes you offense and you feel great injustice. Somebody slanders you, they steal something from you, they malign your name or whatnot, and suffering with Christ. I mean, he experienced that as well, suffering with Christ. God, I count my reputation, I count the need for justice as a total loss compared to the knowing you, compared to your trustworthiness and the beauty and the treasure that you are to me. I count all of that. That's me suffering with you. That's why Paul even said in 1 Corinthians, I believe it's chapter 6, he says, or maybe it's chapter 5, but he says, hey, if you've been offended, why have to go to court? Just be offended and let the cross take care of it. If you're offended with your brother, just be offended. Just take it and let the cross deal with it. That's the application of this. But then there's persecution, right? There are times when you will get persecuted, and perhaps there's seasons and events. I mean, right now we hear of Christians throughout the world being persecuted for their faith because they're Christians, and they experience death or they physical pain or jail time or whatnot. What does it look like to suffer with Christ there? Well, I think part of it is just saying, Lord, this is not too small. You are far worth this. You're my treasure. Again, my body and my feelings and the joy and the pleasure it feels is small compared to the surpassing greatness of the treasure of you. So there's glory, there's an inheritance for those who are provided that you suffer with Christ. So let me put it this way in your notes. We have to rethink your pain in the light of Christ. We need to rethink our pain. You need to rethink your pain, your suffering, your challenges in light of Christ, because here's what I'm going to try to show you right now is that he changes our perception on it. Because when you start thinking that way, this is what's going to happen. I want you to turn to this passage. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 3. 1 Corinthians chapter 3. I've decided in my preaching that I'm going to have you turn to only the passages I think that you have to remember and highlight and bolden. Now, they're all important, but this one is of special importance, I believe, for this topic and for your anchoring of yourself, so as they come, you're able not only to weather, but to thrive through it. And that the gospel is proclaimed in your life through that process. 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Start in verse 21. Now, it's in the context of a larger discussion here. So that isn't necessarily it's more dealing with conflict and strife, but Paul, what he says here applies to our conversation here. So let no one boast in men. That's the fallout from before. Now, here's his kind of timeless truth that is attached there and applies to us now. For all things are yours. That's the statement right there. All things are yours. Now, here's going to elaborate. Whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas. Now, those are the discussion, kind of the context before. I'm for Apollos or I'm for Paul, and I like him the best. And, he's like, what are those guys? Anyways, all things are yours, whether anyone that you're boasting in. Here it is. Or the world, or life, or death, or the present, or the future. All are yours, and you are Christ, and Christ is God. What does it mean when he says, all are yours? The world, death, the present, the future, those are yours. You're in Christ, and Christ is God's. What does that mean? Let me give you an analogy to kind of help this. What's the difference between your car and my car? What's the difference between your house in my house. Aside from the fact that yours is better, I get that, right? Aside from that, okay, what's the difference? My car, my house, I get to actually go inside my car, turn on the key, and I get to drive it home. I don't get to do that with your car. My house, you get to go home. I get to walk inside, take my shoes off, go to the refrigerator, open it up without asking questions, pull out what I want, get a drink, have some food, put it in the microwave, do what I want in my house, right? My car and my house serve me. They serve me. Your house and your car serve you. But my house and my car serve me. So that's why I can get into my car and drive it away, because that's going to serve me getting from here to there. It's going to do what it needs to be done to get me from here to there. So let's rephrase this a little bit. All things are yours. All things serve you. All things are your servants. Not to say that you're the king, but just hear this on me, or what I'm saying. The world is your servant. The world is your servant. Let's think about the world really quick, okay? I mean, so let's think about the two polars, right? Life and death. In the world, dead in the world. Life is yours and death is yours. Let's talk about the life part really quickly. The challenges of life. The challenges of life that we think are not things serving us actually are serving us. The challenges of life, like the cancer, is actually serving you. It's yours. It's serving you. It's doing something for you. It's making you better. James hits on this. Consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds, because you know, here's what's going on. The testing of your faith, it develops perseverance. And the goal of this life isn't for you to be rich or wealthy. It's for you to have your faith so confident in who he is, right? That's maturity, the growth in our confidence in who he is and what he will be and do. Anchored in that, that's the mature person, is the one who trusts him even more. And so now that cancer and that job loss and those challenges are all serving you, because they are making you more and more mature. And the one who is more and more mature, we here are receiving an eternal weight of glory. Now, what about death? Thank you. What about death? It serves you. It serves you. When is life going to be the best? Right after I die. Right? If you're a follower of Christ, that's the cry of your heart. Not to say, God, take me out, but Paul says to live is Christ, to die is gain. Death is your servant now. Life is your servant now. The future, oh man, how long is my future? I don't know. Doesn't matter. It's going to serve you. A short one serves you, and a long one serves you. Because to live is Christ, to die is gain. The present serves you right now. All things are yours in Christ. That's a pretty amazing thought, isn't it? Nothing, therefore, proves to be a loss. Nothing proves to be a loss. No follower of Jesus, no one in this room, if you're a follower of Jesus, is going to get to the end of your life. And you might have had, your suffering might have been 15 times greater than my suffering. And I'm not claiming to be an expert on suffering. By all measurements in the world, I've had a pretty easy life. I mean, I look at what's going on in other places in the world, my goodness. And I even see what's going on in some of your lives, the challenges you face. I think, Lord, when's my day? Because I haven't quite been down that path yet. I don't claim to be an expert, but Christ is an expert on this. And he guarantees you that no matter what experience your life is, you will not stand before the Father and say, even as you see somebody else who had it easier going, saying, I was gypped. You won't say that at all. And you won't say that suffering wasn't worth it. You'll say that was well worth it. In fact, here's another passage, 2 Corinthians 4. Paul says, this light and momentary affliction is preparing for us. Preparing, there's a key word there, preparing for us. This is the good it's doing, because you're in Christ, an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. And it points to as we look to things not temporal, but that are eternal, and that is focused on Christ. As we suffer a certain way, these momentary light afflictions are preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. So let me give you another analogy to help you kind of figure out how this works. We love things that are kind of quick fixes, but I know some of you in here who give hours and hours and hours every day, and you curtail your diet. I mean, you're eating like chicken with no fat. You're eating a certain number of calories in your diet. You're like going off and getting fish and all these additives and droplets at Whole Foods and spending all kinds of money because you are committed to being healthy, and you give your life to this, and you might get 2 pounds off in a month, right? You're like, all that work for so little. You're on that treadmill for hours a day, and you maybe lose only a couple of pounds, or you gain an extra second on your sprint or whatnot. All of that work for so little. But then have you seen that commercial? This is my favorite. See that commercial of that guy? It's some like pharmaceutical commercial, but a guy is saying, does one sit-up? He goes, one. Healthy, right? Someone else is doing a one push-up, right? Gets up, one. That's the key to health, just one. Man, I wish it was that good, right? Just one push-up. See, here's what I'm trying to point you to, is that all the suffering you'll experience in your life, the most extreme version of it is as if you're doing one push-up for entirety of health. This light and momentary affliction is preparing for you an eternal weight of glory. If you were to put on the scales, no matter how much, I might have 15 chips of suffering, you might have 15,000, but on this other end of the scale that God dumps on it, I mean, you won't even see your little speck once you get far enough back to see the mound of your eternal weight of glory. When you put it in the light of Christ, how do I know this to be the case? The resurrection, right? I mean, the resurrection is my anchor for knowing. This is where Paul went to. I mean, here's Christ. The resurrection is that anchor that he looks to. Christ goes through, incredible suffering. He's resurrected from the dead, not just back to life, but back to glory. And here's a guy who walks through walls, but he's still physical. Crazy. Who's now seated at the right hand of God with all power and authority being given to him. And we're going to share in that for eternity and eternity and eternity. How can you be sure of this? Because something really happened in history that testifies to it, with years prior to that pointing everyone's attention to that one event. So as you look at your sufferings, we got to see them in the light of Christ. Put them in that perspective of Christ. I don't want to minimize what you're going. I don't. But can I tell you, in some ways, God sort of does. Hey, don't worry. Don't worry. It's going to be better than you think. It's worth it. It's worth it. You keep going. It's going to be better than you think. And you'll not be disappointed, I promise you. There's so much more we can say on that, but time kind of constricts us, and so I have to keep moving on. But we have to rethink our pain in the light of Christ, which is exactly where Paul goes back in Romans. Go back to Romans 8, and he brings this conversation really to the climax of it all, of suffering and glory. He says, for I consider, we've already talked on this, the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. Now, when you think about Paul, the one saying this, the Apostle Paul suffered greatly. I'm willing to guess that his life either rivaled the most difficult, challenging kind of life in this room, or far surpassed it. He's not, Tim and Paul aren't even on the same page of suffering. He had way more. Maybe you're closer, but Paul experienced quite a bit. I mean, here's his resume of suffering just in terms of, what he wanted to say to you. Flogged with 39 lashes, that's whipped, 39 lashes 5 times. Now, let's think about that one first for a moment. I mean, when you're whipped 39 times, accounts will say that you'll have your back starting to feel like jelly. Petroleum jelly, just getting oozy and open. Not a part on it is unexposed. So this happens to you. You don't live in a day and age with antibiotics, painkillers. You're laying in your room. Infections happen, right? You're trying to keep it clean, but infections can happen. Scarring is the assumed thing that takes place. How long does it take to heal from something like that? 2 weeks? How much care do you need? It's a long time. So you finally heal. You finally have strength to get on and get out there, get on your journey again, and a month later, oh man, ripping off the clothes again, been through this routine, they're back again. Man, has it done healing yet? Were there scabs still on the last one? Probably some scabs still there. Maybe between the next two, there's a whole year that goes by. He gets some time between them, right? Been down this story before. Back's open again, another 2 weeks caring for. And then again. And then again. What's your experience been like? Mine hasn't come close to that one yet. I had an operation once with anesthesia. Lots of painkillers every day. My wife gave birth and she had an epidural. That was helpful, right? No epidural in these situations. No painkillers in these situations. I mean, this is Paul. So what else? Beaten with rods. I mean, that's like an understatement of the year. I mean, what's a rod? They're probably not little rulers and sticks you spank your kids with if you spank them right. Little small things, just a kind of little sting on the behind. No. These are clubs designed to inflict real pain. And they're not thinking to themselves, let's only inflict enough. No, we want to beat them to the point of death. Usually Paul was left for dead, but he happened to be alive. How long does it take to recover from that? How about the head blows? I mean, there's just, even attach that, just the emotional blows. I mean, it leaves an emotional scar on you, doesn't it? Stoned one time, that's got its own challenges too. I mean, again, they're not stoning you just to say, hey, shame on you. They're trying to kill you with those stones. These are not rocks that your son might throw at you and break a window in the house. These are big stones used for the purpose of inflicting massive amounts of pain. Perhaps bones were broken in that kind of process. Shipwrecked 3 times, without food often, without clothing often. He says in there, even in the cold. I mean, that's up there with poverty, right? And then life and danger was a constant thing for him. Okay. Here's Paul describing his resume of suffering, and he says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth even comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us." Do you have an inheritance that is so that is so amazing, that is so incredible, that it makes the challenges and hardships of this world seem manageable, that the pain be manageable? So make it small as you cast your eyes on that. It's what Paul seems to be saying here. I don't even compare. These are nothing compared to. It's an easy payment. Easy for me to decide to pay that price. That's an easy bill to pay right there. Happy to do it. Because I know it's coming. So number 3, let's put it like this. We need to marinate. I picture mine as Paul's being someone who marinated his mind on the resurrection and the glory that the Old Testament preached about and that Christ told them about. He marinated his mind on here's number 3, your inheritance, or the glory that is to be revealed to you. And that's why gathering here is so important, I think, because we get to celebrate. You need to remind yourself, because we forget so many times. It's not hard to forget. So let's just run through, as we close here this morning, just three things I think you're going to be inheriting that I want us to marinate our minds on. The first one is found really a little bit later in Romans 8:23. Just glance your eyes down there, but it says, "And not only the creation," this is about groaning, "but we ourselves who have the first fruit of the Spirit now," here as we groan inwardly as we await eagerly for adoption as sons. Now, we're already sons and adopted, right? But this will be the full measure of that, where you get to be brought home with the parents. And this is what it looks like, the difference, the redemption of our bodies. We get a new body. That's a good thing. Some of you are more happy about that than others. And those of you who aren't as happy as the other person, you got to start rethinking about your body. Why are you not that excited? Well, because mine is perfect right now. I'm a Greek god. I've spent 6 hours. Be careful about those things. When you're too proud of what you have, you're afraid to lose it. It's a dangerous place to be. A new body. 2 Corinthians 5:4 puts it like this: "For while we are still in this tent, we groan being burdened. I love the way he puts it. Not that we would be unclothed, but that we would be further clothed. Okay, so this tent, and we think, oh, I'm going to shed this flesh, get new one. No, you're not going to shed this, but here's what's going to happen. So that what is mortal or dying or deathly, right, may be, I love this, swallowed up by life. Now, swallowing up is usually a process of death, right? The grave swallowed you up, or the whale swallowed Jonah, or you swallowed your food and ate it and you chewed it up, right? Swallowing is not a picture of life. But here he kind of translates this over and switches it over, swallowed up by life. Consumed, engulfed in life. I mean, that's just a picture that kind of is hard to wrap your mind around because it's so counter, but Paul throws you off because your dying bodies will be swallowed up by the grave, but in that really it's being swallowed up by life for those who are in Christ. I think that's why he says, where, O death, is your victory, right? Where is your sting? That's why death serves you. Swallowed up by life. Wow, what an amazing thought that is. Think about your body actually being fully alive. Now, we know that our heart is pumping, hopefully for most of us, but think about real life in your body. I mean, how many of us struggle just with the weakness of our flesh, right? You want to be nice to your spouse, but you're so tired. I just wish that she would just understand how tired I am, right? And then you start getting impatient. But you want to be nice, but you're so tired, or you're hungry. The flesh is weak, the spirit is willing, Jesus says. Or how about just that greed and that bitterness and that envy and that jealousy and all those pride, right? What would it be like to not have those? To really care for somebody and have the energy to do it? What would that, I mean, is that not a good thought? Right? Because right now we're going, I love the idea of serving, but man, when it comes down to it, it just never quite seems like it's a good thing. Because it's just so hard to do. I don't mind serving a little bit, but man, to really serve the way that God has called me to serve, when I read Jesus' the Gospels, man, that's like impossible. Who could really do that? Oh, you will. And you'll love it. I mean, imagine you really loving just serving somebody. Because we all love the idea of it, right? But really doing it, coming down to that, that's where the battle comes in. Wow, that'll be a good day. When there's no sin around, there's nothing competing with your allegiance. You're saying, what I want to do is really what I can want to do. That's a good thought. So your body, that'll be a great day. Here's the second one, the world. You'll inherit the world. Romans chapter 4, don't turn there, I have it on the screen, but we rehearsed this earlier. We said, for the promise to Abraham and his offspring that he would be heir of the world, him and his offspring, he'd be heir of the world, came through the righteousness of faith. So the question is, are you an heir with Abraham? Are you his offspring? Galatians says yes, chapter 3. If you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's offspring, because he is the seed being spoken of there, and heirs according to the promise. So what is Abraham heir of? The world. Guess what you're heir of? That's a pretty big globe. That's not a small amount of land. I don't know how much real estate you own right now, but it's going to immensely grow. It's going to get a lot bigger than what you have right now. Some of you don't own anything, and that's okay. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Yeah. Again, these are good thoughts to have in our minds, aren't they? That would be an incredible day. So just think about what it would look like to actually inherit the world. Now let's go back to the 1 Corinthians. You don't turn there, but just bring your minds back there, where all things serve you. When God created the world, there was this partnership, right? And there was a servant. The plants, the animals would kind of cooperate and serve what you have there. Imagine the whole world serving you. Imagine you inheriting the world. I mean, there's parts of the globe that we are still discovering, right? It's a small little ball, the smallest one in the cosmos almost, and it's just little, still discovering. The bottom of the ocean we just got to in a big vessel and saw very little. There's a lot to be seen. When I look at Jesus and his body and how he engaged the world, no doubt the world was his at that point, right? And he walked through walls, he ate food but didn't need to, but enjoyed it, and so he ate it because he wanted to. I just read about this individual who, the world record for free dive. You know what free diving is? No air tank, no snorkel, no mask, whatever, just maybe a mask, but just diving down, going as far as you can. They reached 702 feet. That's a long ways down the water. People who try that, there's a lot of deaths that go on with that too, by the way. So I don't recommend it. But that's the world record. Imagine you'd be able to swim down to the bottom of the ocean. Right? Because God got all that is his, he is going to give to his son, give to you. Enjoying, without a mask, without a snorkel, without air tanks, just swimming down there, holding your breath for however long you need to enjoy the world. To enjoy and seeing down there. Up to date right now, God has been the only one seeing the vast majority of what he created. We are getting little pockets and snippets of it. And we're every week, every month, every year discovering a little bit more. And we're going, wow, isn't that amazing? And God's like, I've known about that for thousands of years. Been watching those animals creepy and crawly around. I've seen those stars. I've seen that galaxy for so many years. And you are just finding out. Oh, man. And as you find out, your wonder increases. How much wonder will we have as we inherit the world? That'll be a good day. Now, lastly, we inherit, here's a third one, and this is big. We inherit God himself. Now, for some of you, you're thinking, oh, okay, you hit the best two early on. This one isn't quite as. And if that's you, then we got to really talk about whether you're following Jesus or not. And we do. Because this is where all the treasure's wrapped up in. This relationship right here. You inherit God himself. Romans chapter 5, verse 2. I want you to turn there. There you go. Flip back one page. Through him, that is Christ, he says, we have also obtained access by faith into this grace in which we stand, and we rejoice or celebrate in the hope, anticipation, because we're suffering now, not having the full experience of it all, in the hope of the, what? Glory of God. What's the glory of God? Glory of God is his manifested presence, his manifested character, who he is. We rejoice in the hope of obtaining the full measure of the glory of God, beholding it, enjoying it, experiencing it in his presence. Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 16. I am my beloved's, and he is mine. Now you're going to say to yourself, oh yeah, but Tim, it's not that God is mine. God's not my servant. Let's not think of it in those terms. You and your spouse, right? There's an ownership there, a joyful ownership. You own your spouse. In God's eyes, that spouse is yours, and you are theirs. I am my beloved's, and he is mine. And it's a willful, free giving over to it. You're going to have the full measure of God giving himself to you for enjoyment in his full presence. Oh, you can say, he is mine. You can say he is mine. I mean, here's Revelation chapter 21. Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their, is that a possessive pronoun? You bet you. As their God. You're going to inherit God himself. He's going to be all yours. You're going to enjoy him in the fullness because nothing's separating you in any way. There's no sin, there's no allegiance, there's nothing that's separating that relationship. Oh, that's a good day. It's a good day for us. So here's what I want to leave for you. When life gets hard, I need you to remember this statement right here, and actually maybe write it down or take a photograph of it, but remember this. God promised this would come. God promised this would come. It is serving my good, and glory is coming. God promised this would come. In this world you will have troubles. For the day you eat of that fruit, you will die. God promised it would come. It is serving my good. It's the truth. It's serving my good. Whether death or life or sickness or health, it's serving my good. Because it is increasing my trust in him. And glory is coming. So here it is. Endure with hope. Endure with hope. You know, Jesus, when he was about ready to leave the world, he gave his disciples a meal because he knew that they would need something to remind them constantly of just the events and their hope that they have. Because they're forgetful like we are. And so he gave them what's called the Lord's Supper. And it's a tangible experience that engages the senses to help you remember what he did, not only what he did on the cross, but what the glory that comes after that. And so it just makes sense this morning that we enjoy that meal that he gave to us, in which he said, "This is my body broken for you. Whenever you eat of this, do this in remembrance of me. This is the cup of my blood shed for you. It is the blood of the new covenant that I made with you. And that covenant is the inheritance that is to come, that is yours as children of God. Shed for you. Whenever you drink of it in remembrance of me." So we have tables around the room, and as the band starts off singing and playing, you guys, again, don't feel rushed to do it, but go take an element, sit with it, remind yourself of not only what he did to purchase your glory, but also the glory that is yours because of what he did, and enjoy and marinate yourself in that. Let me pray. Father, we thank you, we thank you, we thank you, because you have, Lord, you have spoken straight up with us. You have told us that we will. You didn't try to sugarcoat this world. You told us that we're going to have troubles. Father, but you have not only promised to overcome them, you have overcome this world. And so we have incredible hope, even in the midst of it. Lord, I do pray. I pray for those in here who currently feel like their life is defined and identified with suffering. Lord, continue courage and strength for them. Comfort them so that they might comfort others. Encourage them, Lord, and teach them how to encourage others. But Lord, give all of us a keen sense of what is coming so that as those days come, as those months and weeks come, Lord, that we would be anchored and rooted in you, that our faith would not be questioned or lost because we experience something that is hard. God, we look forward to seeing you face to face, and all God's people say, amen.